Hello, friends. Do you want to elevate your cannabis brand or product? Let's get real. Standing out in the cannabis industry isn't a walk in the park. That's where Green Lane Communication comes in. They're not just a cannabis-focused PR firm. They're your partners in getting genuine, valuable coverage, from features in major publications to shoutouts in niche blogs and podcasts. Hey, like this one, Cannabinoid Connect. But Green Lane Communication isn't just about making headlines. They're about building your narrative, crafting messages that speak directly to your audience, and creating robust media strategies that hit the mark. Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned player in the cannabis game, they've got the chops to amplify your presence. As we gear up for conference season and head into Q4, there's no better time to boost your brand's trust and credibility. Ready to make waves in the cannabis world? Reach out to Green Lane Communication. Check out their offerings at greenlanecommunication.com or find the link right in our episode description. Let's elevate your cannabis journey together with Green Lane Communication.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.
Awesome. We are officially recording. Mr. Kyle Porter, I was just saying before we started recording, it's long overdue, I think, to have you on the podcast. I mean, I know that we've had some exchanges like within Twitter, specifically.
I was going to say we're Twitter best friends at this point.
We're Twitter BFFs. Yeah. And then and also, you really helping me with the agency that you co-founded, CMW, and so lots to talk about there. I think there's some developments on your side. Yeah. But before we do that, I mean, I want to just first kick things off, Kyle, and talk about, Kyle's evolution in the cannabis space. So it looks like you've had a pretty diverse experience given your background since 2016 and roles contributing in biotech, B2C, other verticals.
Oh, yeah.
And then entering cannabis. So tell me a little bit about your relationship with the plant, why you started or co-founded CMW, and we'll go from there.
No, I appreciate it. And I appreciate you having me on. We have gone back and forth, and I've loved watching your progression grow as a voice in the space. And I think that you have some really great guests on, and you always kind of take the pro-plant, pro-medical approach, access. I think that's great. So really excited to be on. Some background. So I always say I've been doing this longer than most, while there's those legacy players who have done it for years and years and years. I've been in the space about 7.5, 8 years, which feels like an eternity at this point. I always say back before anybody even knew what CBD was or Prop 64 or any of that, I was in entertainment marketing in Scottsdale, Arizona. Always wanted to be in California. Met an investment guy who owned something like 40 companies and who was looking to build a PR firm. So met with him, and then met my co-founder, and we grew from there. Just started the two of us and built it. So that was 8 years ago. At this point, I've worked in every vertical of the space. It really started truly in CBD and then biotechnology and novel compound CBD and different formulations, trying to push it through the clinical stage gate in pharmaceuticals. But we expanded, we added digital marketing and really grew with the space. Prop 64 in California coming online, we started to play in the cannabis brands. That was actually our first, what we call outside client, was Candescent, which is a big brand out in California. We did their initial launch there in Desert Hot Springs. Just through the years have grown with it. I think we've all seen the progression of the excitement of 17, 18, 19, and then the end of 19 going, and then whatever 20 was, and 21, we felt a little excited again. And, these past 2 years have been a little bit rougher, as we all know, but I absolutely love the plant. I love the community. I love both sides. I'll be honest, there's a medical aspect. I always tell my Mormon nurse mother about cannabis, and she's a big believer now. But I always said, just think of the stoner like cliches, that those are medical issues, need to sleep, need to eat. We've all seen what it does for spasticity. And then on the rec side, I believe in full access. You can call me a vice player or whatever, but I believe in full access because I enjoy consuming casually and conversationally and recreationally. And I believe it should be regulated across the nation as such. So you mentioned, been a really exciting time for me. I I'd
Well,
love to be on the
so
West.
can I pause you real
Oh,
quick?
please. Sorry, I'll talk
Yeah.
forever.
I'm sorry. I want to dive in a little further. So, first and foremost, like running a PR agency starting 8 years ago, like you said, first in biotech and the CBD side, and then, working with cannabis brands in California, it must have been a shock from an agency, a PR agency perspective to kind of enter this space and be like, okay, like how do we navigate these waters, right? I mean, because obviously there's challenges on the digital side with promotion there on the social media channels. There's lots of censorship and you really have to be smart about how you do it. But then, I mean, what was the reaction with media pitches and reporters? I mean, what was
Right.
their,
And
yeah,
that's what truly created, I would say, the need for PR in the space, or why it was such an important thing. There was no access to normal traditional marketing channels at the time, and we really had to re-educate people. We always had this running joke that CMW stood for changing minds worldwide, because we had to change the stigma. We had
right,
to. And so when you went out, they were starting to pop up, some Forbes coverage, Green Entrepreneur there for a little bit. MJ Biz has been around for a long time, but really there was no such thing as like a dedicated beat reporter. Denver had their kind of dedicated. So you were hitting mainstream journalists who had no idea, right? Like no idea anything about the cannabis industry. And every single headline was like pot. I mean, that was just every mainstream headline. Like we did a lot of work with epileptic children. This was before Epidiolex was approved. Talking about how CBD, we had a client get on the doctors talking about how CBD changed their life. And I mean, the headlines would just be pot for kids, right? Pot for kids. It was pot everything. And so we battled that, tried to explain what we're talking about, compounds, we're talking about cannabinoids, had to explain the endocannabinoid system. Really, like I always called it the cannabis 101. Like you had to give that to all our new employees, all the journalists. Now it's a lot better. I mean, people like yourselves, Javier Abinzi, I mean, they know the space in and out, and you can talk to them and really dive deep into the subject. But we had to keep it very kind of positive and surface level for the mainstream journalists at the beginning, because to them, they just thought of reefer madness and stoners and all of it. So it was an
right.
interesting, but I will tell you, it was a little bit easier to pitch because it wasn't as a crowded of a space, right? Like you only had so many players. And so if you went out and said, hey, we're researching, a novel compound or a cannabinoid based compound in Parkinson's research, they were like, oh, that's interesting. Now they've been pitched 100 different ways about how it saves the world. And so it was a little easier. Now it's a little noisier.
Right. Yeah, I noticed that at first also, like starting this podcast. I mean, there were existing podcasts out there, of course, right?
Right.
But it seemed like most of them were very niche and kind of focused on maybe investing or maybe marketing, right? Whereas, I
Or
kind of saw
legacy
opportunity,
growing. I remember
yeah,
AT's growth.
growing,
Yeah.
cultivation, or even like lab, right? On the lab side. And um, but you're right. I mean, it's so encouraging to see the education level progress, right? Especially with
Oh,
mainstream media. I mean, we're seeing the special that they had within CNN. I mean, and
we're on weed
ABC,
6 now
NBC.
or something, like some Dr.
Exactly.
Sanjay Gupta's weed 6. So, yeah. And it
Yeah.
really honestly all started with weed 1. I mean, that was a huge mainstream outlet covering it from a positive angle. I mean, it was not negative. It was the birth of Charlotte's Web.
Right.
That came from CNN's weed 1. So I mean, we believe, especially as publicists in the space, we believe that changing the narrative or steering the narrative through the media is the best way to how you do it, right? Advertising's got its place, and advocacy and government relations has its place, but the media can steer a narrative so greatly that it's why companies like ours exist.
Right.
And I believe it's been beneficial to the industry.
Yeah, and I mean the story is like, I don't want to say it's easy to tell, but like this plant touches so many demographics, right? You've got like young people who are of age that may want to consume recreational, or they are medical patients. And then of course you have the female benefits, right, of consuming cannabis and the research that they've seen for women. And then also your elderly
Oh, of course.
patients. I mean, the CBD especially, right? If they don't want the psychoactive effect of THC. So you can kind of really focus on different segments of the population and say, look, there's benefits here, right? Of course, there are, drawbacks with any substance if you overdo it. But overall, I mean, it seems like a pretty compelling story.
Yeah, the stigma you can tell is going away. I mean, even in the way that they talk about it in these congressional hearings about the SAFER Act and all of these, there's the kind of random ones that say, oh, you're doing this for the stoners, but the rest kind of, see it as a legitimate industry comparatively than before. They see that obviously it needs to come off of Schedule 1 because of the medicinal, like it has medicinal benefits. There is a literal FDA approved, botanically derived pill on the market. We can't say that there's not medical benefits. So, I mean, I think that that's changed a lot. Even, again, I mentioned my mom, Mormon nurse, hospice nurse. She wants it for her patients so bad, but she can't do it. She can't. That would risk everything for her. But she believes, like, can we get this approved so that we can get it into end of life care? I mean, think about people who are dying. Like, they need to feel the positive sides of being high. I'm sorry, like, there's just no way around it. Like,
Absolutely.
we put my grandma on it. You noticed her completely change. She was happy, hungry. So it's been rewarding to see it. I think that if the regulatory shifts were quicker, we would obviously, I think, have a broader acceptance among all people, and broader access. That's been a bummer. Obviously, I think we all know that in the industry, how much that's held us back. But I'm not giving up hope. I know it's here to stay. I jumped in early because I believed in it, and that hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm.
At this point.
Yeah, no, it's a beautiful thing, and I can relate to you in convincing my mother also and father about
Really?
the benefits of cannabis, and to this day, my dad and I, we consume when I go back home in New Mexico, where it's a legal state. So it's pretty cool how that's evolved. But I did kind of sidetrack us. We were talking about the evolution of your we were talking about the evolution of your journey into the cannabis space. We talked about you co-founding CMW, but then you were kind of getting to something else.
So I just announced, hopefully some people have seen, so been really exciting changes. I was in California for 8 years. I absolutely loved it. Full honesty, it's a little slower than maybe I was ready for. I'm still at a point in my career where I'm really hungry. So was able to sell out of my position into the company. They're still going and very dedicated to the space, and wish them absolutely all the best. And I'm headed out east. So I just announced I've moved on to a New York firm called Virgo Public Relations. I've started as their executive vice president and managing director, with the goal of scaling the agency similar to how I did at CMW, but into these emerging spaces. Now we do work beyond cannabis much more than CMW did. We play in Web3 and blockchain and a lot. But I plan to really scale our cannabis side, our pharmaceutical side, biotechnologies, novel compounds, because it's something I'm passionate about. And the East Coast is an opportunity. I mean, they're 5 years behind us, 6 years behind us on the West Coast. So I think the opportunity on the East Coast is there, and they need their story told, and taking my skills out east.
Well, first, congratulations on the new role. That's very exciting. Yeah. I was wondering, I saw Virgo PR in the background, and for those that are just listening. So I was like, yeah. So no, that's exciting. And what a change, right? I mean, going from California to New York, not only the distance, right? Complete opposite ends of the country, but I mean, the weather, just everything. So
I'm adjusting, especially headed into the winter. But I just think, there's an energy in New York that I'm sure those from most people have been there can feel it. I had to kind of convince myself this last time I went, before I decided to sign on the dotted line, like, okay, I got to fall in love with New York. But I did, and I think that there is a tangible feeling of excitement within the industry on the East Coast, which, I did Benzinga's conference and all of that, and you could feel it. Like, the East Coast is, in California, we're all struggling. But on the East Coast, it's like, man, bring it on. We got money. We're going to create brands. So, they've had a kind of a rough rollout of the program, but I'm really excited to be a part of the East Coast culture there. I've dabbled in some clients, but, bringing my knowledge, my network. Again, I've worked in every vertical, fintech. I mean, name it. I've got an operator for something. So yeah, really, really excited about the new opportunity. Going to grow the firm, and was really excited to share it first on your show.
Awesome, man. Well, hey, it's exciting. You heard it here first on Cannabinoid Connect. Yeah. And Kyle, I mean, let's dive a bit deeper, because that's what I really want to talk about is, given your skills, your insights that you're bringing to this role, tell me how that's really going to shape, right, this build out of the cannabis, I guess, sector within Virgo's portfolio.
Sure. Yeah. Again, I'm not coming jaded. I'm coming with a wealth of knowledge of what we've seen over the past 8 years. Right. And I'll tell you this, Benzinga's conference in Miami, and even at MJ BizCon last year, or I went to CWCBE in New York as well. You could tell that the New York and the East Coast operators are just really excited. And I sat with people and I spoke with people, and they had a lot of the same, I don't want to say misguided, but I could tell they were on the path to make some of maybe the same mistakes that we made as we rolled out programs in longer legacy states. And my thought process was, well, there's national players, of course. We know the MSOs and all of that, and they're going to take it. But there's still an opportunity for up and coming operators to jump into the space. I mean, I was speaking with a guy who bought a bank, and he's going to use the Vault as part of his retail storefront. And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And then I started talking to him about it, and he had a kind of a smaller vision than I think he knew what he was jumping into. And when I actually took him on as a client, beyond PR, I consult on business. I mean, it's funny, in PR, you end up kind of saying like, well, what if we try this? What if we establish an advisory board? What if we do these things and kind of shape their business with them? And so my thought process was, look, I want to be a part of the national industry, which I have been for years, but especially as these new states come online and bigger program states like New York, I would just like to bring what I've learned, my network, again, I've got a guy for everything, but hey, instead of spending 250 grand on this celebrity partnership and thinking that's going to be our be all end all, let's take what we've learned and try maybe a more mixed approach to our marketing or geographical. So many brands came in and said, well, we're going to own the national conversation. Well, that when you're doing segmented geographic areas, you really need to talk kind of directly to your people first.
Absolutely.
As you build from there. Yeah. So I'm going to try and bring at least lessons learned from what I've seen through the years to kind of more infant markets. And I think it's going to be good. And I think, again, and on the flip side of that, there's still a lot of research also in psychedelic research. There's a lot of therapeutic research going on still. And a lot of other players who do PR in the space maybe don't focus on the clinical trial stage, the clinical stage gate of bringing a novel compound to market. So I want to bring that kind of experience. I've communicated enough clinical study results to put people to sleep forever. But, as a communicator, I have to communicate in an exciting way, why this is going to change the world, how we're trying to help people. So I can bring some of that experience to just a larger market, I keep telling my mom, I'm swimming in different pools. New York has different pools per se than San Diego, which is where we were based. A lot of biotech there, but I'm one of the bigger things. So that's kind of the goal, is to bring lessons learned. My smile goes a mile, West Coast mentality to the hungry grit of the East Coast.
Well, it sounds like you're ready for the challenge, and I like how you touched on the importance of communication, and it's a good segue because I'd like to dive into like the importance of amplifying voices in the cannabis industry, right? And the role that media and digital content play in shaping the narrative and perceptions of cannabis and the industry. So, you mentioned it sounds like there's a real opportunity, right, at the mid-sized companies, even the small businesses that are starting out, because it is so new, right? And state by state, there's regulations and legislation that's different, where there's limited licenses or there's unlimited licenses, right? So it can vary, so there is more opportunity, say, in some states than in others. So tell me some, specific case studies or examples where there's been effective, communication made and a huge impact because of it.
Yeah, no. So it all depends what your business is, right? I mean, everybody calls me I always say, they call me for two reasons. They call me because they need to raise money and they need credibility, or they need to move the needle in sales. But I think it's a much broader approach than that. And so, but look at it from the different business verticals. So like what we've done with patient advocacy back in the day was really, really important to get the patient stories out there, to try to change the stigmas, to try to change the narratives, to try to, push for descheduling and things like that, to show the medical side. We did that through all kinds of kids' stories, all kinds of, anyone if positively affected. I don't know if we've all seen that video of the man with Parkinson's who takes CBD.
Larry Smith. Yeah. Yes. I just posted that the other day. It's incredible. Yeah.
It's an incredible video. And that within itself is the power of messaging, right? That wasn't some paid placement somewhere. That wasn't some boosted thing on Facebook. That was a guy who was genuinely helped. So his friend put the story out and it went viral. And so from the advocacy side, we have to advocate for the patient. We have to advocate for the plant, access to the plant. These horrible stories of people getting arrested trying to medicate their sick kid or whatever it might be are absolutely absurd. And so that's one major part of the media importance of at least using media to help shape the narrative.
Do you think that is still effective? That position, like, I mean, we hear it right so often, like the marketing to kids, the potential of these kids accessing edibles that may be perceived as candy, right? And I know this happens, but is it working from a narrative perspective, or are they pivoting in their approach or in their rebuttal?
So my answer to that would be, if in our business, it's always, if it bleeds, it leads. So there'll always be somebody out there who's a naysayer, who a hater, whatever you want to call them, and these stories will pop up. And I'm not saying they don't exist.
They happen. Yeah,
they happen. But a true regulated market in the world that I believe in is putting safeguards in place and all of that. In order to reach said regulated market, we have to push our own narrative of, we do believe in safety for kids. We do believe in, say, safe access, but restricted access to testing, for God's sakes. I mean, labeling issues. We have to push for that as an industry. And that's something I think, as you know, in our industry, we call them either legacy people or, the new suits, as I wear a suit, but I am a legacy person.
You're a hybrid.
I always have. That's why it's always green. It's kind of my calling card. But that's one thing we can come together, I think 98% of times, is saying we do want a regulated, safe market. And so when you see industry advocates out there talking through the media combating this, well, just prohibition everything and just lock it up and it's blah blah blah. We have to combat that with sensitive stories to understanding the nuances of the situation, but showing our advocacy for a regulated market and doing that through the media. And so, yes, but if we just let those stories be out there and just sat there and kept our noses in the ground, I think they might win. We have to combat them, and that's something you can do in the media.
Right. Yeah, no, I totally agree. Addressing it head on, like, duh, right? Like, of course, we don't want kids consuming that are underage. We don't want, so just kind of being more vocal about it and leading with that, so that really it's not even an issue of debate, right?
Or the one that Governor Newsom just vetoed. I don't know if you saw that. He just vetoed
I heard something about that. Was it about psychedelics or something?
It was about cannabis. Well, it was a bunch of things actually rolled into one. But the big one was that you couldn't use human or celebrity or people's faces essentially as any bit of marketing tools for a brand, which is devastating, especially as that's something I do all the time for brands, is position the thought leader.
I was gonna say that's like California's bag. I mean,
that's what we do.
Yeah.
Well, and that's like, but that be honest, that's like saying, well, Elon can't ever speak about or be shown as a part of Tesla. That's just not how it works. Like storytelling in business, you have to have a human connection, in fact. And he vetoed it because it crossed the line, because we have a ton of restrictions. We have childproof packaging. We have colors. It can't say the word candy. There's enough in place there. I think anybody who follows the space in California knows that the illicit market is the major issue, not the ones that are paying 80% effective tax rate and doing it by the book and getting lab tests and etc. So I'm glad that he did. But again, that was done through advocacy. That was done through telling of the stories of small entrepreneurs building their businesses, using it. And God knows we love the stories of the farmers out of the Emerald Triangle, like those homegrown, or not the homegrown, but the legacy grower stories. I love them. I think they add so much I believe there's a space for legacy in cannabis as well as new biz, and they all play together there. But then I was going to say, and then on the flip side of all of that, say you're a B2B person, say you're a ancillary provider of some sort. You could be a packaging company, you could be a fintech, you could be whatever. It is so difficult now to get your message out, right? Because there's just so many players. You can't advertise, you can't do anything. And so that's one of my favorite places to play in, is to try to position and create thought leaders and industry experts through good messaging strategy, being out in the media, being advocates, being placed in huge outlets. And to me, that's it's so powerful to see like an entrepreneur, like their reaction when they're placed in an article is just so exciting, because this is their baby. You know, this is something they've staked their whole lives on to make it work. And that's another part of PR that I do find extremely important, from the success of a business and like the, I don't know, the way it touches people.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, and one thing that I always kind of think about is taking it even beyond the medicinal benefits, right? And the safe access, but even talking about like the benefits of the plant overall, right? Like, I mean, environmental. I mean, I've said this multiple times. So if
God.
you're hearing it again, I'm sorry, but like we
I
talk about climate change every day, right? I mean, it's an issue. And the fact that hemp is not brought up in the conversation like just blows my mind, because there's no other plant that takes in as much CO2 than the hemp plant, right? It enriches the soil, it sucks out the mycotoxins and the heavy metals and the
grows like
pesticides
3 times on one plot, like it's less
and
water.
then yeah, and then you think about even with like trees, I mean, years for trees to grow, right? I mean, hemp, you can turn that over every 2 months or every three.
I was going to say it's like 3 or 4 that, and this one little plot can be replanted like one right after the other.
Right.
It's so in my cannabis one-on-one spiel I give people, I talk about the farm bill and hemp and all of that. And we are so far behind in the processing, the industrialization of hemp.
Right. The decortication. I always have trouble with that word, but the separation
the
of
Chinese have done it forever,
right.
But we had through the Industrial Revolution, we have full prohibition. So we have nothing, like as we all saw in 18, you can grow endless amounts of hemp, but there's just nothing to do with it, unfortunately, except for at that point, turn it into biomass that nobody could sell and all of that. But you're right, it hasn't been addressed. And why do you think that is? Do you think it's because of there's no money in it this minute? There's lack of advocacy? That one, it has not progressed as I hoped it would.
I think it's a number of things. Like, first off, you're absolutely right. Infrastructure is not there, which tells us that there's lack of capital, right? There's no money being poured into that space yet, which then also leads me to the conclusion that there's a lack of awareness and understanding and education around it. Okay. So you pull that lever, right? But then I think the other issue is the threat to industry, because my next point was going to be, outside of the environmental benefits, there's the industrial benefits, right? You can make plastics and houses out of clothing. And so I think there's a hesitation on the special interest side, right? The people that probably like that would be threatened, the industries that would be threatened. So there's like a two-way street. It's like there's a lack of awareness and understanding, but maybe that's because there's a reason for that, because if people were to understand and be educated about it, they'd be like, duh, no brainer. Like, why don't we do this? Right.
200 something uses of hemp that probably nobody knows about.
Right.
So let's going back to our entire conversation of how we move the needle on the cannabis side. Honestly, the truth is because people paid people to do that, because they saw this multi-billion-dollar, possibility in recreational cannabis. And so systematically, I can see, I guess then would be an issue is there's nobody paying to further it more, much less invest into it. So thus it's not moving fast enough. Thus it's not economical. And we're in this stalemate with the progression of the use of hemp. No, absolutely. Again, the Farm Bill opened it up, man. But what did the Farm Bill, what do we only know about the Farm Bill? Well, CBD, which again, I'm all for, CBD, but
yeah. And it's kind of a half-baked bill because there's no regulation around it. So it even furthers the stigma to the industry overall, because, you're no hating on the synthetic cannabinoids. If that's what you do, right? Because we're limited on what we can do in Texas. But it's like a lot of those products are unregulated. They're not safe. You don't know what's in them, right? So it's like this catch-22. Where if the FDA would just recognize CBD and minor cannabinoids as a dietary supplement, it would provide more legitimacy and credibility and safety, in the space.
From the consumable side, absolutely. Ingestible side, absolutely. I mean, the fact that they just punted on the dietary supplements this year is just absurd. I mean, we're furthering, like you said, the stigma. I mean, again, going back to my mother, not to bring her up again, but she's the biggest one of like, well, why? Why? That doesn't make sense to me. I can go and, I mean, you can buy anything as a supplement these days, and you're not going to regulate the safety or the supply chain of this huge industry at this point. But I'll be honest, I have had 2 hempcrete clients, a clothing client that was acquired. I'm trying to think of other hemp things. My point is, I've had operators working in the space, and all just ran into, I couldn't get enough money. I couldn't bring my product to market. The one guy who, he had built a whole hempcrete house, and we got a big press push around it and whatnot. Nobody was interested in going up against big concrete.
Who is that? Right?
I don't know, but then again, actually, I just saw, on the flip side of that, I just saw a thing on Twitter that was this 3D printed house, and the guy was saying, look, this is one material, here's the 8 materials it takes to do a frame size of a building, it's so much safer. But he's got big lobby, and he said that against him in all different fashions, from the contractors union to the materials providers. So yeah, I mean, I get everything in an emerging industry is disrupting another, right? But like that, to your point, I'm glad you brought it up, because nobody asked me about that anymore. And I have worked in hemp. I mean, that was that, and we've all been so focused on trying to get high THC or whatever to like people across the country. We're not talking about like, oh wait, what about that 100 years where we could have, like, where America was founded on hemp, and we could have had big hemp farms, and we could have learned to process it and industrialize it and do it in a sustainable way, which is a major push for, I don't know, everyone now. It's really good. It's a really good question. And heck, I'd invested it,
It's fascinating. And that just shows that there's opportunity, right? There's so many different angles and narratives that are positively impacting society that this plant presents. So, it's just, I guess, timing also, right? Like you said, because, the appetite to kind of take that story on from like a mainstream media perspective is probably not there, right? They probably don't want to talk about how, hemp could replace, concrete, like you were saying earlier. So, it's interesting. I do want to ask you, because you talked about the small business owners and the mid-sized companies that you're really looking to support, right? And so how can PR and effective communication empower small business owners? Like, they're thriving on a budget, right? They're bootstrapping for the most part. What are some actionable tips and things that you can share?
Sure. And I'd love to talk about this, because I do with everyone. I'm a very honest, transparent, probably to a fault, PR guy in selling and pitching my agencies through the years and all of that. There's a lot you can do on your own, and there's a lot that you can learn online how to do and all of that. And my big thing I always say is, be wary of your marketing dollars across the board. And you always are, right? But everyone thinks that PR is just a switch. And if you go to New York, if you go hire a New York firm, I got to stop saying that, because now I am one.
If you come here.
But if you go hire a big powerhouse and you give them 20 grand a month, you think that your entire business is going to change. And I've just seen time and time again, these operators get just screwed over, because you'll get a placement. That's great. But that's not going to change your business overnight. You know what I mean? Everything in PR comes in momentum. Everything in PR is like a snowball effect. So my recommendation is always get yourself started. And everything, picture PR like that old breadcrumb trail, right? If you have no story, you got a blank slate, you got to start telling it. And so I always say, start with a foundational piece of content. I don't care if it's a press release, a blog, a LinkedIn post. I don't really care what it is. Here's my vision and why I decided to change the world through my business. And then come up with another one, and then come up with another one. And that's what a good, hungry PR firm should do. Again, there's a lot of big firms out there that come in and go, I don't know, what do you want us to talk about? A hungry firm should come in and say, I want to understand your story as well as you do, so I can then convey it. And I'm going to do it constantly, that it has to be out there telling the story. And so, again,
that's a big piece, right? Is the reinforcing part, because we're so distracted today with so much content. We're being inundated with scrolling on different social media sites. So if you're not effectively, like you said, this foundational piece, like, why am I doing this? The why, right? But then if you're not following up you just kind of disappear, right?
100%. We have this this theory that we kind of coined years ago that's called the heartbeat effect, that if you're not, picture the news of your company as your heartbeat monitor, and if you're not putting out news, you're flatlined, you're dead.
Mm-hmm.
And that's so, and I'm not talking huge spikes, I'm talking a nice rhythm. And so, yeah, absolutely. People who come in and go, I've got the greatest news in the entire world, Kyle. I need to be on the cover of Forbes and make a splash tomorrow. That's not how this works, baby. Like you gotta build this story. You know, I don't care, to the greatest PR people, Donald Trump, to the greatest PR people out there who are good at promoting themselves, you've got to tell a story and make it resonate and over and over and over again. And especially, like you said, in the fast news cycle of the day. I mean, if you're not seeing that, I always say there's that old rule of, what is it, 7 or 9, the old marketing rule of 9, that it takes 9 times to see a message to take action. I mean, think of it that way. Think of PR as a similar thing. Bloomberg or CNBC ain't going to have you on until they've seen this kind of like, who is this person? Oh, that's interesting. And so that's something, you know, of course I advocate for a PR firm. That's what I do for a living. But there's so much as small business operators that you can kind of just start to tell your own story. Look at Matt from herb.co. I mean, the man just puts out content constantly that just and it's always like, here's how I did this, and I can't wait to I mean, he just is building an audience by just dripping out stories of his life. And that's the most important part of PR is you got to remember it's all about humans. Like, yes, there's financial reporting and stuff, and that's interesting, but at the end of the day, a human's reading it, right? A human has to go, oh, that's interesting. And so to remove the human side of it is a huge mistake. And so think of your business as a human, as your baby. Think of yourself as the father or mother or whatever of such, and get your story out there and use every channel at your disposal. You know, email marketing, all of them. I mean, just everything that you can come up with, your friends, get them to reshare them, just push that out. And you can do that for nothing. I mean, literally nowadays with ChatGPT, you could be like, hey, I have an outline of what I think, and it will write you some great stuff, edit it. There's your foundational release. There's your first, like, whatever, you know, then, you know, start following people on Twitter and following people on LinkedIn. I mean, look at us. We have no background except for the fact that we've communicated a few times. You've seen me put some stuff out. I like all your morning inspirational ones, by the way, that you're perfect. It's like the highlight of my day. It makes me feel great. So like kind of thing. You chose to do that. That's authentic. Always be authentic in your messaging, and people notice.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I need to pick those up again, by the way. I've kind of gone to the wayside with the baby. Yeah, it's rough. No, but with the baby too, I'm gonna get back on it just for you, Kyle. I'm gonna think about that in the morning. Like, what would Kyle want to hear today?
I get excited. Hey, in the midst of regulatory, and especially what we're going through now in the world news cycle,
I know,
and our own politics, just all horrible things. You put out this positive message, and I loved it. And always like, you're right. I'm gonna go get it.
Like, conquer the day, right? Exactly.
Yeah, no, you totally inspire me every morning.
Well, thank you for that. And you know, I'm glad you brought up the role of innovation, right? Because you talked about, I want to piggyback off your heartbeat effect, and I couldn't agree more. And here's the thing, right? If you do things with a purpose, there's benefits today with doing it. Not only the benefits, like you said, about reinforcing your message after about 7 or 9 hits, people kind of finally understand, or they're coming, they come around to become advocates or even follow at a minimum. But even specifically within the social media channels, if you're doing that, that is what the algorithm favors. That's what that's what it looks for. I mean, if you're not active on the platform and you post something once every month or once every 2 weeks, you're kind of just lost in the sea. So I know that firsthand, being in social media for over 10 years, even with the podcast here and my promotion strategy. I mean, get content out, right? Figure out what messaging pillars you want to focus on, and then just create content there. It doesn't have to be about just selling your product, right? Because you really can't.
Don't know what you just said, the content pillars. That's really important, or content buckets, whatever you want to call. I had a friend of mine who was like, well, where do I start? He wanted to be like a hair influencer or something. And I said, just start with your buckets. He said, what do you mean? And I said, come up with, let's call it 4, maybe 6. And one's personal, one's hair tips, one's hair news. Just pick your buckets and then come up with 6 to 8 video or content ideas in each one. And I promise you'll find a rhythm, right?
Yep.
And then you just go through them and through them. And I said, until you have that 6 to 8 in 6 different buckets, you're going to feel lost. You're just going to stare at your screen and go, what do I do? But if I've got my buckets, I know what category am I putting out today? It's an inspirational one. Okay. Well, I'm going to pull from this one. Got it. Okay. And that, I mean, it will lead you to put things out. And this is coming from someone who has failed at social media, because I do it for my clients and I don't pay attention to myself. And it's been horrible. I mean, I need to focus on it more, and I plan to here as I kind of take on this new adventure. But a perfect example is a very good friend, David Cranon, LinkedIn. He just got that badge that nobody gets as a top investment banking advice giver, because he is just constant, the man. I mean, he just puts it all out, and he does it phenomenally, and he does it by himself. I mean, I don't think it costs him a dime. Maybe he has a scheduling software, and it's possible. It's absolutely possible. It just takes some work. And with ChatGPT, it can't be that difficult.
It can't, and everything takes work. I mean, so if you're invested in it, I mean, if you're not advocating for yourself, no one is initially. So that's just kind of the bottom line. And guess what? It's hard because everyone's on social media and everyone wants to be the top influencer. And, so like you said, you're speaking my language, but mapping it out. Don't stare at your screen trying to figure out, what do I post today? No. Just have those buckets or pillars that we talked about.
Buckets. And then when you're, I don't know, if you're a smoker, if you're a drinker, whatever you meditate or whatever, sit in front of your computer one night and go, all right, I'm just going to brain dump and just get some stuff. And then when you go back to it, you'll go, oh, that's great. I could just write something with that, or I could take that and run with it and engage. Of course. I mean, you have to engage in other people's. And as I've always done, I like to repost yours. And it's just things that you do to show authenticity. I mean, that's a very important thing, is you do have to seem authentic. If you look like a ChatGPT, just AI bot, just putting things out, that's not going to work either. But be humble, be authentic, and be kind of a little transparent too. Like, hey, today it's not all peaches and roses, It's I'm struggling with the world news today. It's been hard for me to focus. That's a fair thing to say. I think that authenticity adds to it. And definitely with journalists. I mean, if you ever pitch a journalist like, this is the best thing you've ever tried and you must try it, and I mean, there's not going to be a story there. I mean, you have to be authentic. Who created it? Why? What was the innovation? What problem is it seeking to address? Who will it help? I mean, you've got to be authentic in trying to deal with journalists. Otherwise, you just look like a marketing fluffer, and they'll just see right through it.
Exactly. Yeah, they'll see right through it. That's very sound advice, Kyle. I could not agree more. Good stuff, man. I mean, I think there's going to be a lot of takeaways from this episode. I think as we come to a close, I want you to pull out that infamous crystal ball and let's talk about industry outlook for a second. I mean, navigating the present, right? Obviously, there's challenges. The future looks bright, right? They're talking about rescheduling. So, I mean, that's pretty big. I mean, they've never done that before. The recommendation that HHS put out. So let's analyze current trends, talk about challenges in the industry and what you're forecasting.
Yeah, I'd love to come on, as I felt a couple of weeks ago, and say like rescheduling or descheduling would be 10 times better. But
agreed.
But I'd love to. I would like to say that might happen next year-ish, even maybe potentially this year. Unfortunately, given our current situation with our house and world politics and everything, I'm worried that SAFER is probably not going to see the light of day ahead of the election. I wish, because I work with a lot of publicly traded companies and they need access to capital and they need access to investors. I mean, it's just the saddest thing in the world. It's the most ridiculous thing. I mean, 280E, it's ridiculous. I worry that's not fully going to go away next year, just because of our just mess in Washington and their inability to agree on anything or get anything done. But that all said, I see investor sentiment increasing. And what I mean by that is I believe we might have hit the very low of what people believed it could hit. And so I kind of felt that in my conversations that I'm having with other leaders is, okay, I may not be getting the bajillion valuation that I used to get, but I'm getting capital as long as I use it correctly, right? And as long as I'm smart about the use of it, they believe in the company, especially on the East Coast. They believe it. Again, don't go out and sign $200,000 celebrity endorsements unless you're loaded, and make sure. I think we've all seen a major trend is that the market and investors and everybody wants to see profitable businesses, that we can't just be losing and losing and losing money. So I think as new operators come online, if you're strategic, if you're tight, if you're lean, doing things right, and there's money to be got out there, so that to me provides a very positive outlook, and I'll share further why. Because there are so many players in the space, I'm seeing M&A pick up. And so if you and not even M&A like let's take their thing and oust them, partnerships, JVs, working together, and now that we've all kind of gone through this up and down, I've never really felt like we're big competitors out there to one another, even with fellow PR firms, whatever, fellow ancillary players. No, we're all in this together. There's a big enough slice of pie. I wholeheartedly believe that. It may be harder, but if you can be smart and ride the tides and not overspend and all of that. So I guess for my crystal ball, I would dream of small regulatory change next year, such as rescheduling. It's looking like more than descheduling. I'm worried that safer is not potentially a thing, but that said, it does not stop new states from coming online. It does not stop new investors from coming in, and we were all waiting for the crash, or we're all waiting for the recession. I think that fears of that are easing a little bit. Now, again, geopolitically, we've now quickly changed, but a lot of times at war times that we don't see a negative influx. So my point is, I think it will be more positive than 22.
Right. Yeah,
I think
it's got to be better than this past year, right?
23 is already feeling better.
Yep.
We're seeing program states like Missouri, for instance, where wholesale prices are great. That they're actually, they're doing it right. We've seen some issues, of course, with New York and their rollout of their program, but they're trying. To me, I think signs are pointing to there's still space, obviously, for growth, but there's still space for the little guy. And that's kind of what always worried me, are truly the big players, the suits, the MSOs, are they going to come in and just own it all because they have the money? Well, no, they're even they can't just go spend like galore, because they got to watch their bottom line, because they're publicly traded and all of that. That opens the door for somebody who raises a couple $100,000 and says, or has a couple $100,000 and says, I'm going to open a retail store, or finds partners and works with social equity partners and things like that. That the East Coast, I think, will fuel that. California's got to get their stuff together, but even Colorado's kind of stabilizing a bit to that regard. So my overall crystal ball is the boom of 27, 28 is not maybe next year, but it's certainly not going, I don't think, down further. And on the even more positive side is, I think, acceptance, which is proven by every survey out there, acceptance of the industry, acceptance of the medicinal benefits of cannabis, access for patients, even like we talked about, the idea of researching what to do with him. All of that, I think, in the public stigma mind, is in the best place in history. And that within itself creates an opportunity. And we may not get rich overnight, but who cares at this point? We all we know but we push it forward. So who knows? I'll look forward to hearing Chris Walsh's predictions, as he always does at MJ Biz. But that's kind of my crystal ball, at least what I've got.
Yeah, no, I think those are all fair assumptions. Especially I go back to that example you gave with the heartbeat impact, right? And the heartbeat effect, and the states coming online is that momentum, right? That is the force that just can't be stopped. So that's evident. And then medical states also, right? There's over half of the country is medical at this point. We're almost there with the recreation side. And then, like you said, the acceptance. So all those things are just naturally driving forces that we don't need to worry about, right? We just kind of put our heads down.
Congress or anything can stop, right?
Exactly.
It's there.
Yes.
And I don't quote me on this, but I don't think I've ever seen a stat of total sales going down in a state. Yes, I mean, I understand the wholesale price might go down and operators don't do well, but like more and more people are interested in consuming than ever before. And I don't see that changing.
No, New Mexico is a great example of that. I think every month where like either the Santa Fe Journal or whoever reports, like every month is record breaking. Like
That's what I mean. Even in
yeah,
California, again, I'd have to look at it. That I don't know off the top of my head, but even in California, I don't think we've like sold 700 million one year and then we're down to 640. Like I don't think that happens. I think it's still going up every year. I mean, look at Canada. Canada's the prime example of, yes, we thought it was going to be massive, but we're seeing it, but it's still steadily growing. I mean, there's
right.
not, no matter what, their consumer base is still steadily growing in a fully legalized country. That's, you can't stop that. So
Right.
that
And they have limitations with their products, right? I
oh
mean,
God, so much.
so it's like even with the limitations that they have full access to all the different formulations, which they don't, it's still steadily growing. So
Right.
you can't stop the momentum of this plant. You just can't.
So let's take that to your morning tweets or whatever and remind ourselves, industry that we love, that things may seem bleak from time to time, but the fundamentals, what we all got into it for, are better than they've ever been. I think it's Bill Maher who always says that you can't deny progression. Now, whether we're at where we want to be in terms of whatever social cause you've got, you can't deny we're better than we were 100 years ago. So we can't deny, cannabis industry, that we're in the best place we've been in to date. It's just rough, but from those fundamentals, outlook positive, man.
Yep. I totally agree. Hey, we got to stay positive, and there are wins. There are wins in there. And yes, Kyle, it's been a pleasure talking with you, man. I really enjoyed it. We finally made it happen, and we got to do it again. So once you kind of get settled in your new role at Virgo PR,
Yes.
let's have you back a couple months from now and talk about what you're seeing in New York and how you're
Absolutely.
adjusting.
I love it. No, I really appreciate it. You're right. It's been too long, but you've been wonderful to the industry and us and all of that. And so keep it up, and I'll follow you on like and retweet or whatever it's called now. And we'll go from there. Wishing you the best end of the year, Q4.
Thank you so much, man. I'm wishing you the same. And again, as always, thank you to the audience for listening and tuning in.
Absolutely.
Until next time. Bye.
Cannabinoid Connect, the nation's most diverse cannabis-related podcast.